Hello, Bethesda families. Thank you for joining us in an opportunity to be able to sit down together with a friend of mine and Brent Brunson. We're going to spend some time talking about our roadmap to return. And we know that our families have lots of questions, and we want to take this opportunity to redefine and reimagine what we're going to be doing as a school and as an organization going forward into the coming school year. I recognize that many of the questions you have we want to share and engage with, but we also know that there are many questions we can't answer at this point. But there's some of the difficult questions that need to be answered now as you're trying to think about the plans for the future for your family and with Bethesda Christian School. And so we wanted to take some time to dive into that together. So I asked my friend Brent to join us, and he's going to be asking some of those harder questions, but also giving us a chance to be able to dialogue and present some scenarios that are important for your consideration.
So you asked me because you know I'm not afraid to ask you some hard questions.
That's right, and
Right.
we need to be able to answer some of those hard questions.
Well, I made some notes, okay? And this might not be the place that you would have thought to start, but I'm just going to ask you straight out, bottom line. Are we returning to school in the fall?
Right. That's the question looming over all of us as we're trying to consider what the future is going to be. And we know that there's uncertainty, but we can say that as we've prepared this roadmap and been talking it through with our executive team, that we're confident that our return in the fall, and based on the progression of opening up Texas and the stipulations being placed on us by local health officials, are moving us towards being back here at BCS. Now, being back in BCS is going to look different, but that's okay because we have positioned ourselves as an organization to be prepared for what the new normal will be. And that's why we want to take this time to outline what a roadmap to return looks like, because that roadmap is truly going to be dynamic and based on current circumstances and what health officials are asking of us, but also our cultural context at Bethesda Christian School allows us to be nimble and adaptable. So that's a unique opportunity.
Okay. So, yes, we're returning in the fall. Our kids going to be on campus in the fall?
So our campus has now gone from a brick and mortar building to a virtual classroom literally overnight because of this pandemic. And this pandemic has caused our school to reimagine and re-engineer what BCS needs to look like going forward in the future. And when we surveyed our families and asked them their enrollment intentions for the year to come, about 70% of them said, if you're opening up your doors, we're ready to come back into the building. And so we want to be able to honor that as best as we can based on current health practices. But there are 30% of those that say, we're praying about this. We want to see what's going to happen with local authorities and their recommendations from the CDC. And we might have a child who's immunocompromised, or we're just not comfortable being in a large group setting, and we want to hear what the plan is for BCS before we're going to make that decision.
So, okay, so you're, and I'm hearing you say we are returning in the fall. Now, I also know that this thing has changed, not just Bethesda, but just in our society, government regulations, protocols. That's changed in some cases, not just daily, but hourly. And I understand. I just heard this morning on the way here, the World Health Organization has said there's a second wave possibly coming. So there's the reality that Governor Abbott might have to look at some new restrictions coming in the fall or whatever. I think what I'm trying to say is we know it may not look the same. So it may not return to 5 days a week, or maybe it is 5 days a week. That's the plan, but it may look a little different. What are you thinking it's going to look like, I guess is my question.
Good. I need to probably rewind back, though, to say when this pandemic broke in March, the Bethesda community was challenged by how do we respond to this? And I'm proud to say that each entity within this organization has responded in such a way that has allowed, whether it's the ministries of the church, whether it's the education of the school, or whether it's the Child Development Center, in a way that we have flourished within this community. And so I say that to say our Child Development Center was able to be a part of the essential workforce through this pandemic, and we had to close, and we had to consider being closed for longer. We had to close our doors for a day and put protocol and procedures in place to then be able to reopen as a part of the essential workforce. And we've been doing that now for the last 8 weeks. And because of that level of responsibility, we now can envision what coming back into this building for church needs to look like, come back into this building for what school needs to look like, and the response to health protocols, and they're very generic when they give them. So how does that look in the building of Bethesda? And that has been a unique process.
So you learn, what you're saying is you learn some things through the process of keeping Bethesda Child Development Center open.
Absolutely.
Which, by the way, thank you, because I know that we had healthcare workers who needed a place to bring their children so
That's
they
right.
could go work. And you provided, and all kinds of first responders.
That's right.
And others who were declared essential had to go work, and they had to have child care. So
Absolutely.
I know that's a wonderful thing. What through that process did you learn that you can apply to the school?
So that's a great question, because there are some main areas that we've been able to learn. For example, social distancing. There are some common sense practices to social distancing that we've been able to adapt and learn through this process. We've learned regarding modifying our procedures. Some of our normal procedures, like pickup and drop off, like our food service. We've also considered transportation and what needs to happen there, and quite frankly, it's just not something that we can exist with right now. Large group gatherings and the ability to keep classrooms self-contained and not interacting with other groups of children for the sake of a potential resurgence, whether that's in our building or more widespread in our community. Those are all things that we were having to take into consideration, that we were trying to be prepared for whatever circumstances were placed. If health organizations were going to require us further stringency on pickup and drop-off, we were prepared. Whether they were going to allow for intermingling of groups, we were prepared. And so that's the goal going forward, is we know that these circumstances, as you've said, continue to progress. And back in March, it was almost hourly. That's spanned out a little bit further, but they still are changing rapidly. And so we need to be able to be nimble, adaptable, and then ultimately thrive in the circumstances, and we believe that we can.
Okay, so back to my question about the fall. We're all, as parents, I think, hoping, I think a lot of parents, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of parents are hoping for being back on campus more days than not, hopefully 5 days, and we all see the benefit of that. But how will you prepare or get the campus ready for what might come, and where are your thoughts today regarding being back here on campus?
So in our roadmap to return, what we've done is take the entire spectrum from what would be a normal return to the building, as it were, for the past 39 years of Bethesda Christian School existing in this brick and mortar building, all the way to where we had to adapt as a fully remote home-based learning organization in the spring. And we believe that by having the opportunity to have done that, and again, it was in a crisis mode, but we would like to be able to see how we could fluidly move back and forth in between this continuum. And so we're going to keep our learning management system intact, and by keeping that learning management system intact, we'll be able to move.
Wait. Pardon my ignorance. What is the learning management system? Because I'm not sure I
Sure.
understand
That's an educational term for all the tools we're using to be online. And so our learning management system here at Bethesda, and as you've seen, many schools are using many different tools, but our learning management system here at Bethesda has been a combination of our RenWeb system.
Okay.
That RenWeb system combined with our Google Classroom and our video technology with Zoom, that's the system that we've created to navigate the spring, but that we want to remain in place as we go forward into August.
Got it.
And that learning management system will truly allow us to be adaptable, varying these circumstances. Okay. And so as you look at this, you can see we've really jumped to the far two extremes, and we also can exist in the middle. So let's just take as an example, if your daughter's 6th grade class were now contained as a group They entered the building. They were educated throughout the day as a group. They went out to play as a group. They ate lunch together as a group. And then they had to leave the building as that same group. They weren't necessarily going and commingling throughout the building at this point. We would consider that a modified return. And that modified return would allow us to, if any embers of COVID-19 were to exist in our organization, to put those out very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. Whereas if that group was having to, let's just say, and we wouldn't want this to happen, but that an outbreak happened in that particular 6th grade class, we could navigate that class over to a resurgent return, that 6th grade class only, and continue to keep the remainder of our school in a modified return and on our campus. So when you're asking that question, will we be in the building and will it be 5 days a week? The short answer to that is we prefer that, but we also know that based on health protocols and based on the situational happenings of our school, we need to be able to adapt and thrive. So if that happened in that particular class, it would be a 14-day quarantine, a resurgent return for that class. Their teacher could teach remotely, their students could still learn remotely, and we would ensure that there was not a COVID-19 spread across our organization that would, in essence, shut us all down, whether that was our elementary school, our secondary school, our child development center, our church. I mean, we're risking a lot when we're considering these decisions.
Okay. So for me, as a parent, this brings up several questions. First, I want to clarify this far left green circle, normal return, that's 5 days a week, everybody in the building, full sports, chapels, recess, eating lunches together. That is what we were for many, many years before coronavirus, COVID-19 came
Correct.
out, right? Okay. Remote return, far right on the red, is what we immediately switched to overnight when everything shut down around us.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
so,
let me just clarify, and when we use the word normal going forward, because as you said, that's the existence that we had, we are hoping to come to a normal return at some point. Yeah. But we recognize, short of coronavirus being eradicated, that's just not a possibility in our near future. And even if that happens, say 6 months, a year, or however long that might be, we would still want to keep our learning management system in place going forward. And here's why. Our learning management system has now allowed us the opportunity to have a window into each of our classrooms. That window into each of our classrooms is available for our teachers, for our administration, for our students, and for our families. And so let's just say, and this happened to us this year, a water main breaks, or a inclement weather knocks us out for a week. Now that school calendar that we give to our families that has a start date in August and a finish date in May, we can stick to that and still be able to navigate going forward this as an opportunity. And so even if, let's just say, beyond COVID-19, we're back into a normal, as you said, sports, fine arts, eating together, chapel, and all of those things, we still want to have that infrastructure in place for those types of things that always happen on any given school year, and then we can continue to adapt and thrive even in those circumstances.
Okay, that makes perfect sense, but also understanding that there are government regulations, protocols, guidelines that are all out there that we have to follow. We're not here now, so if we're over here, can you break down modified and hybrid and let me see? And I also want to key in and ask about that. You've piqued my interest on keeping classes separated, so I've got more questions. But can you break these down and kind of give me a little more? Because it sounds like we're going to be living in that area.
Sure. The modified return is if we were to have started school today, I would say we're probably somewhere in between the yellow and the light green right now. Before I go into the details of that, I want to point out two really important things. The first one is continuity of instruction and learning in any school and any given school year is a key component. And you hear about the summer slide or the words like academic regression. That's always in front of educators to ensure that continuity of learning and instruction continues year by year for students as they move through our educational systems. And so that's something that's pressing on the teachers and the administrators, irregardless of coronavirus. But now you're seeing it's sort of magnified as you're hearing in the news, or even as you might have felt as an individual family, that we want to ensure that our kids are prepared for the next step and the next step after that. And so that's an important part of it. But here's the thing I don't want us to miss, and as we do this, is these returns are not only ensuring continuity of instruction, but they're ensuring that students are able to be met individualized instruction and where they're at, because it really isn't just about keeping the ship of Bethesda sailing on as a whole, but that we're able to go into the lives of each student and evaluate where they are now, where we want them to be going forward, and how we best can help get them there. And that's extremely important even as we're considering these things. So you don't want to necessarily get too caught up on the percentages there, other than to say continuity of learning and instruction is our focus. And so if we were to have come back right now, this modified return is likely where we would be at. And of course, students would be coming into the building. There would be the modified procedures in terms of pickup and drop off. We have to have health screenings and temperature checks and any evaluations necessary for that. We're going to need to consider social distancing, what food service has to look like, what large group gatherings can and cannot happen, and then transportation and any type of isolating control groups that need to happen at a moment's notice. But all things considered, no one has coronavirus, and we can meet together in individual classrooms and have the ability to work in these sort of self-contained units. Third grade is meeting together as a third grade class, and we can't have them intermixing across the building.
Yeah. Okay, so if that's the case, and I know that there are lots of parents that are saying, yes, you're open, we're coming. So I think you said 70%, right? So, but okay, for the 30%, pardon me, for the 30%, let's say I fell in the 30% and I'm just not quite ready. So for my daughter, Braylon, what if I come to you and say, I want to be at BCS, I see the value. And by the way, let me just say, as a parent, I noticed that you went from green to red basically overnight. I mean, we had that elongated spring break, and you took a few days, but you went from green to red overnight seamlessly. You had succinct, easy instructions on what to download. We downloaded Google Classroom. You created email addresses for every student, and I noticed that, and I was very impressed, by the way, and I'd say thank you, because the continuity was there. And I know, I hate to say this, I don't know of another school in the state that did it as well as we did. And I'm saying that from a parent's perspective. My wife and I commented on this several times. We had friends on Facebook that were saying, our school, we live in an area that has probably, if not the most sought after, one of definitely in the top 2 or 3 most sought after school districts in the Metroplex, maybe even larger. And it was a mess. And we saw parents commenting, some of our friends saying, this is a disaster, and kids couldn't figure out this. And I know public schools are also, they're dealing with, they've got a lot of kids that don't have devices or access to devices, and so they're dealing with a different level. But I just want to give you my thanks, because you did this well. You did this really well. I appreciate that,
Brent. And I would say, just as if you've ever gone to a drama program or any type of event like that, there's so much work that happens behind the scenes, and what the audience sees is the polished up version, and you're giving that reception from a parent, and I appreciate that. And I will say, our teachers were the ones that were either backstage, they were coming out as the actors or actresses and working extremely hard, and when the rubber met the road and the time and effort had to be put in to do it, they showed a can-do attitude. They were ready to get to work, and many of them putting in countless hours through this. And they were the ones, too, that had little kids at home while they had to do this. So they were navigating being a parent while trying to do something completely new. And so we're thankful for our community. And I would say, not only is it a credit to them and their work, but it also demonstrates what's to come, that they recognize that this is what's on the horizon, and they will be putting in the same can-do attitude and effort that it's going to take to prepare for this. Because we know that crisis and contingency planning that happened in a moment's notice isn't sustainable, and we didn't expect it to be. We knew we had to adjust sort of on the fly, but we also knew that there was going to be a new horizon, and they will step up to that challenge. And I do want to make a comment about our public schools and other schools. The public schools in this area are making decisions for tens of thousands of students, and that's a difficult place to be in, because you often have to go into a place of, okay, we need to just make sure kids are getting fed. That's something that was not a reality for BCS. We need to make sure that they can connect to the internet. We did a technology survey, and we had some devices distributed, but very few. And for the most part, connectivity wasn't an issue. And so if you're just looking at the hierarchy of needs, that was the hierarchy of needs for them, as it was food and water and needing to be able to get kids hooked up.
In public school.
In a public school system.
Yeah.
And so for us, we were able to, we didn't have those same challenges, and I recognize that those were challenges they had during this 8-week period. There are also challenges that they have going forward. And so we need to be holding up the leaders of those communities so that they can continue to get it right going forward.
But in our situation, and for a parent that might be saying, why wouldn't I just enroll in public school? And I haven't forgotten, I had a question about this with the 30% of our population that we're talking about that I want to get back to, but that the road's kind of taking us to this, my train of thought. Why wouldn't I just put my child in a public school if I think there's a second wave coming, or if I think, this is, we're going to be out of the classroom? Why wouldn't I do that? I know as a parent, I know that I'd be missing the biblical worldview integration that happens in our instruction, because I still saw that in everything that Mrs. Bell did. My daughter was in Mrs. Bell's class. I still saw that heavy biblical worldview integration, and still, the daily talk about Scripture and things that she was developing in her class. But is that one reason why I wouldn't make that decision? Because we can be more agile because of our size, because of some of those limitations that we don't have?
Right. Staying on mission as a provider of quality, Christ-centered education hasn't changed. It didn't change when the pandemic hit in March, and it's not changed in our planning going forward. So to your question, we do have the ability to remain nimble in these circumstances, because we are making decisions for hundreds of people as opposed to tens of thousands. And so that does give us some level of versatility. And then, as you can see with this roadmap that we're going to be talking about, and I know we're going to go back to your specific scenario, I think that's important. But as we're showing this roadmap, you can see that because of our size and scope, we can make some decisions that will then allow us to remain flexible in a certain environment based on circumstances, because we don't know whether there's going to be a second wave or whether there's going to be individual circumstances within our building that will be a COVID-19 diagnosis, and then how we respond to that. So let's go back to that scenario.
I'm going to throw you several scenarios then.
Okay,
let's say I'm in the 30%. My daughter Braylon, I'm just not ready for her to return. But you're returning, it looks like, to it's going to be mostly on campus. I'm not there yet. Can I still enroll her in BCS?
Absolutely.
And still, if I still know that I want to be here, I want the Christ-centered education, but I'm not ready for her to be in the classroom, how will you accommodate her?
So let me just start by saying, as we are in a modified return, let's just say we're sitting there right now, there are certain restrictions from our government agencies, whether that's national or state level, and then also some of the organizations that we partner with, like, say, TAPS, for example, who runs our fine arts and our sports programs. They're going to be giving us guidance in terms of what we can do. And so that will be a part of all of this decision making. But if we're sitting in a modified return and we have a family like you're explaining in yourself, that coming back into the building is just not feasible or comfortable for that family individually, that child can still join our classroom and be a part of it in a hybrid setting where, in essence, they are at home. Our teachers are teaching from in their class. We have a Zoom meeting going on where they can join it. Miss Bell is teaching her class, and Braylon, sitting at home, is a part of that class. The Google Classroom is open. It has the assignments and expectations loaded in there, and those teachers are able to seamlessly navigate between students who are in seats physically and online. And then that way, a student like Braylon is able to stay at home, and let's just say she had the flu or your family's just not comfortable with it, still engage with the classroom. And I talk about that maintenance of continuity and learning instruction. That is in place. And even if, for example, she couldn't be in those Zoom meetings where the teacher was teaching, we record all of them. They get uploaded to the Google Classroom, and then that student can access those and continue to navigate. Now, once you feel comfortable and are ready to return, whether she had the flu or whether it just wasn't a layer of comfortability you were with the family, then she could return and that individual could be a part of it. Now, there would be a different consideration if, for example, Braylon was in our classroom and was diagnosed with the coronavirus. And of course, we don't want that to happen to any individual in our organization. But if that happened, the strategy right now for the CDC is you have to isolate and quarantine. And so that individual who was diagnosed would need to be isolated. The entire influence of the interactions for that student would need to be quarantined. And so Miss Bell and the entire class would have to be quarantined. And she could move that class to what we're calling a resurgence return, teach them remotely. They're all learning remotely. That 14-day window passes, and then come back into a modified.
Okay, so that was actually one of my scenarios. You have a child, and like we say, heaven forbid that happens, but we have a child that is diagnosed with coronavirus in a classroom. That one classroom can go here to Orange, but the rest of the school stays here.
Correct. If we're doing the things that we had just mentioned. If parents are allowed into this building and chapels are happening all together and lunch is in the cafeteria and everybody's intermingling, if we're doing all of those things and that happens, now we all have to move over.
It wipes out everybody.
And everybody's got to move to this. And so we're in essence keeping these containments until we can ensure that a normal return is where we're at.
Okay, so how do you have a chapel then? Or do you just not have chapel?
That's such a great question. I have asked our staff, and our executive team is continuing to put this in front of our staff. We're using the word reimagine and re-engineer. And those two lines of thinking are how we're proceeding with things that are going to have to be a new normal. And so take chapel, for example. We have the ability with our classroom infrastructure to, in essence, continue on with chapel remotely, whether we're partnering with Bethesda Community Church and the kids ministry and videoing some sessions that are being played in the classroom, or we come into the chapel and have 5 individuals or so lead it and then broadcast it live into the classroom. We could then have chapel. It would just be in our classrooms. The same would be true for food service. We have that infrastructure in place in this building right now with our Child Development Center where food service is happening inside of those classrooms, and we would just need to do that. And I get it. It's nice to have the community activities that we normally are used to doing, but those are decisions that across the country schools are having to make. And even churches are having to consider that. I know our own church loves the fact that we have many different languages who worship in their native language, and we like to intermix with each other. But during this time of regathering, we're not going to be able to do that. And everybody's willing to make that sacrifice for the sake of our long-term plan. And we're hoping that we can eventually get to that same normal return. And I believe we will, but we're going to have to be patient in the way we go to bat. And we're going to need to be adaptable to those circumstances.
Well, the reason I like this is because just as I'm hearing you explain it, I'm grateful for that the whole operation isn't going to have to shut down if there is a case of, a confirmed case of COVID-19, which we hope doesn't happen at all, but I just like the fact that we can continue going. The other thing that as I'm sitting here listening, all the scenarios that are rolling in my head, I think about if you have a death in the family and you're traveling to Florida for a week to go, grandma's passed away and you're traveling, what that has meant for students, and this has been the case in my family, is a week's worth of makeup work. That is not easy on top of the regular work.
That's
and
right.
It creates not only the stress of the grief and losing grandma, but it's also then having to do all that makeup work. But I can hand Braylon instead a device, and while we're in Florida, she's still participating in her classroom. And so this hybrid kind of thing allows her to stay engaged and continuing that continuity of work
Right.
instead of having a week's worth of makeup work.
And I'll just point out, as you've said that, because that's a great point, is we're not just talking about this innovation being something that is going to have a stopgap measure to get us through coronavirus. What we're doing here is creating a level of 21st century education infrastructure that is necessary for us to thrive going forward into the future. And so we recognize that as we had to go from green to red in a moment's notice, that for our BCS families, the younger your child was, the more difficult that was, because obviously the level of hands-on needs of the families was higher. And so if I've got a kindergartner and a first and a second grader and we have a death in the family, that's a much more difficult circumstance than if I have a high schooler and we're leaving out of school. And so we do recognize that, and we want to prioritize, especially even as we're talking about the returns, that our youngest students have the most hands-on ability of our teachers, because we know that that's an important thing. And for parents, we have a number of families that are two working families, and quite frankly, they need their kids here on this campus so that they can go and work, and they're entrusting the education of their child to us, and we're partnering with them in that way. And so keeping all of that in balance is extremely important.
Yeah. Okay. So so let me ask you this. Given that this is kind of now the lens that I'm looking through as a parent, and these are kind of the sliding scale of options, how are we going to manage the government regulations and all the things that are going to be put in front of us that we don't even know today? And in regard to, you mentioned sporting events and fine arts and TAPS and all those things, how are we going to manage that in the fall or in the future, just period?
That's a huge question, and I'll start by saying the way we've navigated it thus far has been to truly take them as they come. You know, I'll just take TAPS for example. When we went into a full resurgence, all of our spring activities, including fine arts and including sports, were in essence put into this holding pattern by TAPS. We had no other choice but to comply with their decision making, and so the same is true right now going into the fall. TAPS has not released their full plan. They've released maybe 5 different options and where they might be, but the reality is we have to wait and see with them, and so we do need to take somewhat of a wait and see form with them. But in terms of our ability to comply to health protocols in our building, as I said before, the fact that we've walked through this now with our Child Development Center, and we're getting ready to walk through the regathering with our church in June, these steps are going to allow us to take further steps when we come to the fall. And I will say that our teachers have shown a level of flexibility and adaptability during these circumstances that I'm confident that if, for example, health screenings are a part of our morning routine, well, we have a nurse, that's true, but our nurse isn't going to be able to shoulder that load by herself, and so I'm sure that our teachers and our staff that's around here will jump in to help take that initiative forward based on those circumstances. And again, I just reiterate, the fact that we are dealing with hundreds of students as opposed to tens of thousands of students gives us some ability to be nimble during these circumstances. But I do want to just point this out, and you talked about it from a government perspective. The reason why we went from green to red in March is because Governor Abbott said schools must close in the state of Texas. And we don't know if a resurgent might cause that same level of communication to happen, let's just say, in the fall or in the winter when flu seasons are rampant. If that happens, we have to be ready to respond to that as an organization. We cannot turn a blind eye to those recommendations for the safety of the whole. And if that happens, now we're prepared to be able to move seamlessly through this. And you mentioned that happened fairly seamlessly, having never done it before. How much more seamlessly will it look when we've prepared for it in this way?
So it gives me even more questions, but I also have some things from the lens. So I am a parent, but I'm on staff at Bethesda in the church, and I know some of the tools and technology that we have available. Some of them we're using right now. This is the room that we are sitting in is where chapels normally take place.
Yes.
So you could, in theory, right, have a person sitting right here leading a chapel service. We have cameras. We have the ability in the to live stream
Correct.
those chapel services to our classrooms, and the kids can participate in a chapel service from their class or from their home.
Right.
So that 30%, if Braylon, if our family finds ourselves in that 30% and we're at home, she could participate in a live chapel service or a recorded chapel service to watch later, and continue those things that are so important to that experience, right? So
Absolutely.
And then what about you're mentioning Zoom and Google Class? Is there a plan, or is the intention to have all of that technology in each classroom this year for the faculty?
Absolutely. So when we talked in the beginning and you asked the question about our learning management system, our communication with our BCS staff has been, we will continue with this learning management system. And so that's a package of each of those. But the reason why we're saying that now is because some of this is going to need to be reimagined and re-engineered. And the scenario that you just shared is a similar reimagination that every church across the country has had to make for them to have a worship service, for them to have their pastor speak, and we're no different in the way we're planning for our chapel services. And so we've been able to learn from each other in terms of what we've done, even in decision-making for our church, and how that can help us sitting here now for our school. The other thing I just want to point out in this is we recognize that as a community, we've lost a physical touch with each other. And that's because of social distancing and because of restrictions with local health agencies. As we regather and as we engage again, there's going to be a certain mental health crisis on the horizon or already in place. And so we need to be ready to synchronize the wellness of our community with the continuity of learning instruction. We do not want to neglect one for the other. And I'm hearing a lot in the news talk about academic regression and how we're going to close achievement gaps for students to get them back on track with standardized testing. And I do believe that addressing that is important. But addressing that without the holistic approach of the wellness of an individual, the wellness of their family, will be a huge mistake. And BCS is not going to make that mistake. That's been a hallmark of the Bethesda community for many, many years. It's why this place has been around for over 80 years as a church and existed now our 40th year celebration going into next year. That's something that BCS as a community has always embraced as an important element of who we are. And so I believe that will be a wonderful synchronization of those two things to ensure that whether a student's at home or whether they can come into the building or any variation in between, that the wellness of them is taken care of from a holistic perspective.
Makes perfect sense. You touched on the whole mental health thing. We know that there are lots of challenges that students are facing or could face, but it sounds like to me this model makes a place for any of that, not just from an academic standpoint, but regarding mental health or whatever else.
Right. So, I mean, this may be an oversimplification of it, but young kids, elementary age kids, middle school, even high school, they need a chance to play. Mm-hmm. We already have that structure in place, but to be able to get them out and prioritize their chance to just go and play with their friends is an extremely important element in all of this. And that's something that we're going to be able to capture right away. Of course, it's going to have to be in these smaller, self-contained groups, but we can do it, and we can ensure that they have that social interaction that's such an important part of who we are as individuals and what we do together.
Will we see them getting more active in the classroom?
Absolutely. They'll have to, because they're going to have these, in a normal return schedule, they're often moving about the building, whether that's to go to art or to go to PE or to head out to recess or to come for cafeteria for lunch. And so with some of those things taken away from the daily schedule, we're going to have to ensure that we fill those gaps with physical activity.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more thing, and I hope this is not touchy, and I'm sorry if it is. I got your last two communications that you sent to all of us as parents. I read every word of both, and if I just take it for what it says, you mentioned that ACSI, that's our accrediting,
Correct.
our accreditation agency. You mentioned that they have put schools on notice. I don't think you said it like this, but you kind of, what I took away was schools have been put on notice. Enrollment is probably going to drop. And you referenced some changes that you had, tough changes that you had to make.
Right.
What does that mean for BCS? Are we going to have fine arts? Is that going away? Are you thinking, is enrollment dropping like a brick here? I mean, explain that as a parent, and where are we with enrollment and all of that?
Sure. It's an interesting place that we're in right now, because as I said, we've been able to reimagine and re-envision even the admissions process for new families. And so we've had a virtual campus tour, which our media team has prepared before coronavirus ever was a thing. And yet we were able to use that tool along with some of the Zoom technology, meet parents right where they're at, and actually have them complete our admissions process and even finish enrollment here just recently. And I think that shows
These are new families?
New families joining us, which I think is a wonderful trend.
That's awesome.
We've been able to touch
great.
new families in a way that we wouldn't have if we just did the old version of it. And now we can't meet in this building, but we're able to start seeing reimagine and re-envision focus in our enrollment process. And I'm thankful for not only our media team, but Rhonda Dugas, who works in our admissions area. She's been working tirelessly to ensure that new families we're reaching out to and touching them. And actually, even the ones that have enrolled, we're going and meeting back with them and giving them a BCS shirt and taking a photo of them and helping them start to feel a part of our community already. So we've had new enrollments take place. Now, we're just talking about declining enrollments, and I'm glad you mentioned ACSI, because they are being forthright with school leaders, and I've been in a number of webinars with school leaders across the country to prepare for anywhere between a 10 to 30% drop in enrollment, and that's a huge number for private schools across the country. And I truly believe for the Bethesda community, we've remained strong in enrollment all the way through home-based learning, and so we recognize that going into the school year to come, some people's personal situations have changed, whether they've lost a job or private school education is no longer an option for them and they've needed to make some decisions. We're being respectful of that, and we understand that that will cause some change in enrollment, but we do truly believe that as families in this area are considering the future for their child and understanding what our plan is going forward, that we'll hopefully see an upward tick and trend in enrollment. And right now it's there's some in that wait and see pattern, as you've said, in that 30%, and this is an important step in that direction. And we know that more communication has to happen after this to scale this up.
Well, to be fair also, I don't mean to interrupt you, but there's some wait and seers in the 70% too, I think.
Sure.
Because they're like, I'm waiting to see if the campus is open in the fall.
That's
I mean,
right.
I've had friends that have said, we want to know, are you going to be green or at least real close to green?
Right.
But we're waiting to see. So hopefully this has answered those questions, because you've answered them for me.
Yeah.
So I know that there's some wait and seers, but it sounds like to me, through all of this and with what you're being respectful and understanding what ACSI is telling you, but you're also preparing the groundwork for growth, it sounds like.
That's right. And we don't necessarily know where that growth is going to come from. I'm going to reference our Child Development Center again to say this. During all of the coronavirus outbreak, there were many child care centers in this area that had to close their doors. Mm-hmm. And some of those were out of not being able to comply with restrictions, but others were financially just couldn't make it. And I believe that some of them aren't going to be able to turn their lights back on. And that's a horrible thing that's happened, but that's the reality of the situation that we're in right now. For our Child Development Center to navigate through this and then now seeing a rise in enrollment since then, I believe that trend will likely follow in our school. But where we see that trend in the portions of our school is the part that we're still not truly clear on. If I had to make a prediction, I think the younger ages of students, likely that trend continues because parents want to get back to work and they need a place for their kids to be, and they also have entrusted us with an important responsibility of co-laboring through the quality Christ-centered education, and so homeschooling is a difficult option for families that are both working, and we're seeing more two-income families necessary on the other side of this pandemic.
So you referenced in your email having to realign. I can't remember the word that you used, but
reimagine and re-engineer.
Re-engineer.
The Disney,
realign.
they call it Imagineers.
Yeah. So you're Imagineering here.
I don't have my Mickey Mouse ears on.
I would like to see that. I think that would be interesting picture. I guess what I want to ask is, with you having to do that, and I guess that there's a part of realigning of staff and financial priorities every year for every private school.
That's correct.
I imagine across the country, but with us doing that and you having all of this coronavirus also as a part of your decision making, where are we? I mean, really, are we going to have music? Will there be a music program? Will there be a fine arts program? Are all that? Do we have staff? And if I can ask, financially, are we okay?
Right. I'm glad you asked it that way, because, and this is why it was important for you to sit here with me, because these are the tough questions that I know our families are wanting to know the answers to. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to get caught up or swept up in rumors or just letting your imagination speculate. And the truth of the matter is, Bethesda Christian School is going to be able to maintain the same level of robust programs that we've offered prior to this and going forward. And so fine arts, sports, robotics, technology, those are all things that are hallmarks of this holistic educational program, and they haven't changed. Yes, we've had to tighten our belts and trim our sails so that we can ensure efficiency going forward, but that is not changing the level of infrastructure that we have in place. And I think when we then move to, and I said this earlier, we don't necessarily have control over what TAPS is going to do or what even local Tarrant County Health Agency do, but when we do move into that normal return, we are able to thrive going forward from them, because for all schools right now, they're faced with how this is going to be held in balance, and we know that we're a part of that process, but in keeping from sacrificing what is made this place a wonderful place that most parents have chosen because of the holistic educational component, they will not have to turn away from that, and they're not going to find another place that's thriving as well. We're all bound by what is UIL doing, what is TAPS doing, what is TEA saying, what is CDC saying, and I'm using all those acronyms because each of them are influenced into our decision making, and we don't have a lot of control over them at this point, but we know we want to maintain them. So sports camps and fine arts camps, we often do things like that over the course of a summer, for example. And so our leaders of those programs are having to reimagine and re-engineer what those programs could look like. And I'll use sports as an example. If I usually was going to be a part of a team camp, that's no longer an opportunity. But that doesn't mean that the kids can't do individualized workouts. Their coaches can't give them some sports-specific training for them to do, whether it's at home or even if we do something here on campus where they're following protocol and regulations. So our programs can maintain, and we're just going to have to be creative in this process.
So yes, sports. Yes, fine arts. Yes, chapels. Yes to all of that. It may be a little re-engineered, reimagined for a while, but yes to all of that.
Absolutely. And
That's
we've got a
exciting.
staff that's strengthened to do that and positioned well to do it. And we've had a lot of meetings over the previous weeks to ensure that we're at a place that we can say that now.
Well, it's exciting to me to hear, because I think some of this is a blessing in disguise, and I hate what we've all been through in order to get here, but it sounds like to me we've pushed forward
Right. Our fine
forward
arts
a
program,
number of years.
they ran a Bethesda's Got Talent competition in the middle of coronavirus. I mean,
Yeah.
we had kids submitting videos and doing things at home, whether it was singing or dancing or acting, and we were able to run something. And so, like you said, we've pushed forward through this. We've not gone backwards.
Okay. And I know we're probably running long because I keep asking questions. But along those lines, I saw the Bethesda's Got Talent thing. I could not get Braylon to enter. She just would not do it. She's going to kill me for saying that. But I saw a lot of kids did, and that was incredible. I saw kindergarten graduations on Facebook that were handled through Zoom. I know we did a fifth grade for Miss Bell's well, actually for both fifth grade classes.
For the end of year awards?
End of year awards. We accomplished a lot.
Right. And I would also add, we've might have established some new normals that are things we don't want to go away from. We had a wonderful celebration that you were a part of with our drive-in prayer service for our seniors.
Yeah.
That was something that I would say might be a tradition going forward because it was such a wonderful event. So as you said, we've been doing some things and as a result, we might consider these become traditions of BCS going forward.
Yeah. I see us leaping into 2020 where you're talking about technology in every classroom that's going to allow for a kid to be on a Zoom meeting if he or she is at home sick, now, and I understand if maybe you're on day 1 of the flu, you're not going to feel like watching a Zoom meeting, but day 2 or 3, when you're feeling a little bit better, but you still can't return to school,
right,
you can actually participate in class. Or like I said, if there's a death in the family, we're literally advancing to 2020, and we're going to have technology-capable rooms. We're going to have I don't know. I guess I'm saying there's a blessing in some of this that
we're going to redefine what attendance means.
Yeah.
We have defined attendance as you walking through the threshold of those doors and coming into your classroom. Attendance doesn't have to mean that any longer. And so sometimes there's a pressure with a family of my son is sick. He's kind of on the border. We're not sure if he's going to infect others or not. And then out of attendance, send him to school.
But he's going to have perfect attendance.
Well, perfect attendance is going to be reimagined and redefined.
Yeah. That's incredible. Well, just again, as a parent, thank you. I've enjoyed seeing this, and I think having more technology, all of these things are preparing kids. And I'll use that word holistic that you've used several times. I just see this win.
That's great. Well, I appreciate you as a parent being willing to sit down with me, and I hope parents who have joined this and see it will take the time to think this through for their family. And, of course, we know this is a work in progress, and if questions come forward, we're going to be working towards answering them, and we'll have more of these types of forums for us to be able to just dialogue with our community. And so I thank you and I thank the Bethesda community for joining us to be able to talk about our roadmap to return for 2020-2021.